Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Prevention Matters panel session. Prevention Matters is a monthly online panel hosted by the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, where we dive into what it means to prevent homelessness in our various communities. Most of us know that prevention is necessary if we want to solve the current housing crisis, but the series exists because if we want to address homelessness through prevention, we must be clear on what prevention means. So, what can we do to reduce the chances that someone will experience homelessness in the first place? What can be done to support people who are at high risk of homelessness or who have recently become homeless? And how can we ensure that people who have experienced homelessness and who are now housed don't face housing precarity again? To delve into these questions, Prevention Matters invites brilliant minds to tell us about how prevention looks in their work, along with the lessons that they've learned along the way. As we get into today's panel, I invite you all to reflect on one question. When you think of preventing youth homelessness, what or who typically comes to mind? Many people would not immediately think about lawyers or other legal professionals, yet their role in supporting youth at risk of homelessness is often critical. To highlight an aspect of prevention that might be newer to some of us in the sector, today's conversation will explore the unique role that lawyers can play in preventing youth homelessness. We'll be joined by legal professionals to learn a little bit about how youth homelessness prevention has looked in their work, and they will be interviewed by Amanda Bucknia, who is a strategy, policy, and innovation specialist at the COH. I'd also like to let you all know that for the first time since the show's beginning, we'll be joined by Lydian Smith, who will be sharing her perspective as a youth with lived experience in this topic area. Many of us in the sector are inspired to do the work that we do because of things we've experienced in our own lives. But choosing to lead with that more vulnerable part of your story in a public space like this one is not an easy thing to do. So today, more than ever, I strongly encourage you all to stay engaged and supportive in the chat. Please engage with what our panelists are saying, discuss it among yourselves, and as always, remember to ask any and all questions you might have during our open Q&A in the second half. These sessions are not your typical webinar, and your participation is a key part of what makes them special. So please continue to be as kind, supportive, and active as you always have. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please reach out to myself or my wonderful colleague, Emma, who said hi in the chat, and we'll be able to help you out. Before we get into it, I wanted to remind you that your feedback is very important to us. So if you have any thoughts on how we could improve your experience, or if you just want to send us some words of support, please take a moment to make use of our feedback form in the chat because we do want to hear from you. The session will be recorded and shared publicly on our YouTube channel. So if you'd like to maintain your privacy, I'll invite you now to turn off your video and rename yourself using the tools at the bottom of the screen. Since we're gathering online today, a single land acknowledgement doesn't capture the richness of our many locations. The Canadian Observatory on Homelessness is based in York University, Toronto, so we will share their land acknowledgement. But as always, we invite all of our guests to consider their position regarding the land in which they find themselves. We acknowledge our presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. And so, without further ado, I'll be handing today's session over to start to our lived experience perspective, with Claire and Lydian telling us a little bit about the impact of legal services from a more personal sense. Feel free to introduce yourselves and take it away. I believe we'll be starting with Claire, and then Lydian will join us in just a bit. And so to the both of you, and then to all the other brilliant panelists joining us later in this conversation, we look forward to hearing from you today. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Promise. I'm very excited to be here today to speak with everyone. My name is Claire Milgate. I am the Street Youth Legal Services Lawyer at Justice for Children and Youth. I'll tell you a little bit about our legal clinic and the program I run there. And then I'd like to have a conversation with Lydian, who is a client of mine. So, Justice for Children and Youth, or JFCY, is a non-profit specialty legal aid clinic. And we're located in Toronto, Ontario. We have about 10 lawyers in our office who all represent and advocate for youth under 18 and for homeless or unstably housed youth under 25. All our lawyers are expert in children's legal rights across a really wide variety of legal areas, including youth criminal justice, education law, family law, human rights, health, housing. The list goes on. Sometimes it's too long. But these legal issues often come up in the context of young people experiencing homelessness, young people without immigration status, and young people who are the victims of family or partner violence. And so our clinic has developed specialized programs to help young people in these particular areas. I run the Street Youth Legal Services Program, or SILS, and I work with homeless or unstably housed young people who are 25 years or younger. Um, it's a really unique legal outreach program. It's been in place for over 20 years, and it was developed in response to young people requesting legal services that, as I say to young people, it's not in a shiny glass tower downtown. These are legal services that are really easily accessible. They are available in the spaces where young people congregate and receive services anyway. Uh, but they are nonetheless very, they are expert in the areas that young people are facing problems. And so the SILS program really consists of four pillars or four particular service areas. One is working with individual clients, providing advice, referrals, and representation directly to young people. They are our clients, and we have a solicitor-client relationship with them, with all of the professional obligations that go along with that, including rules around privacy and confidentiality, rules around conflict of interest, all of the usual professional obligations that arise in that solicitor-client relationship apply for us with our clients. The second pillar is I go to drop-ins around the city. As I mentioned, I go to the places where young people are already receiving services and tend to congregate. So, like meal service places, rec centers, health centers. And I meet with young people in those spaces to help answer their questions, encourage them to think about legal issues that might be arising in their life, and to become more familiar with their rights and in understanding legal services available to them. I offer workshops to young people and to frontline staff who are assisting them. And those workshops offer information about how to access legal help, reliable sources of online legal information, and detailed information so that young people can get to know their rights, recognize when their rights are being infringed upon, and know what steps they can take to try to address those infringements. So that's the third pillar. And then the fourth pillar is really around trying to create systemic change. And we do that through test case advocacy. I'll speak a little bit more about that. It was something that Lydian and I worked on together. And also through policy submissions. So we're trying to use the law as a tool for reform and systemic change. Uh, all right, Lydian, are we ready to jump into our conversation?
Yeah, we could start.
Okay, awesome. So do you want to tell everyone your name and a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Lydian. I'm Lydian Smith. I go by Destiny. I have been a client of Claire's for about 4 years now. Yep. And a child and youth worker slash social service student at George Brown right now. And I work with Children's CAS for Black Youth Leaving Care. That is a program that assists Black youth to come out of care and get on their own and be more stable in their life, which I went into that program simply because I got that help from legal services, and it made me realize that a lot of young people could use this stability.
Awesome. Thanks, Lydian. Okay, so we're going to have a conversation about Lydian's experience of contacting a lawyer and working with a lawyer through our Street Youth Legal Services program. So, Lydian, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about why you needed a lawyer to start with?
So initially, I came to Canada in 2018 and I wasn't registered for school. My family and I didn't have the best connection, and I decided I wanted to go off on my own and mm, basically just try to get into my goals.
Hmm.
I contacted Claire because I was having trouble registering for school because I was only 16 years old and you need a guardian at that age to register you for school. So Claire helped me work on a plan to get emancipated, and we then looked into my immigration status, which was a part of my problem to get registered for school. But those
Yeah.
were the two main things that got me connected with Claire.
There was a whole collection of things going on at the time, wasn't there? You'd just come to Canada, you needed to register for school, you were having trouble finding a good place to live. Um, and so how did you end up finding our clinic? Do you remember?
I just Googled lawyers for kids or free lawyer, whichever way, but I did just find you guys off Google.
Online. Cool. Yeah. Um, okay, and I remember that initially we spoke on the phone and then we had a meeting in person. And like you said, the school board said, oh, you can't register, you need a guardian, even though you were 16. And the law says that at 16 you can register on your own where you have withdrawn from parental control and you're living independently. So nonetheless, the school was telling you you can't register. Um, and that was one of the first legal issues we worked on together. I remember I was able to send a letter to the school explaining your right to register. And so we kind of squared that one away pretty quickly. I think within 2 weeks of contacting us, you were then able to go to school. So that was a great one to get off the top. Your immigration status was kind of the next legal issue we worked on together. That that was a real barrier for you accessing different services. I still remember the first time we met, you had a folder and you had all your papers organized in this folder. And honestly, Lydian is still more organized to this day than I am. It's really impressive. How did you feel, Lydian, when you met with me? What did it feel like to meet with a lawyer?
Um, in the moment, it was very different. I was very nervous. It was my very first time ever meeting with a lawyer. I wasn't sure what I needed to share. It was my first time sharing a lot of things that we had to actually discuss for you to be able to know how you could be of service to me.
Hmm.
So it was a difficult place. It was a bit vulnerable for me. And at the beginning of our meeting, I was very nervous and I didn't know what to say, how to say it. But you made me pretty comfortable. And I noticed that you are just as, how do I put it, interested in an outcome for me as I am for me. So I felt comfortable to explain this.
Yeah, we were really gonna work on it as a team. And so we've already sort of spoken a little bit about the different legal issues, but do you remember having a goal for when we met? Like, what were the goals that you had in your mind that you wanted to work on?
They were, first one was getting to school. Second
Hmm.
one was my immigration status. Third one was stable housing, which is how I got connected into CAS, which you did refer me into as well.
Hmm.
And from there, it was just, to have a process of going to school, some sort of stability.
Yeah, yeah. You were really searching for that stability in all sorts of different areas, in your housing, in your income, in your immigration status, in getting to school. Absolutely, that was a big, big goal. Um, I remember us meeting, and I was hearing your story. I was in awe of your independence and your strength. You had been doing everything on your own for a really long time, and you had made incredible strides in trying to navigate different systems and services. Uh, at at our first meeting, I remember one of the most pressing issues was income support. You were really struggling with that. We spoke about different options available to you. In Ontario, there's Ontario Works as one option for income support, and there was also support available to you through the Children's Aid Society, the Child Protection Services. So we discussed the pros and cons of those two options, and we called CAS together in that first meeting. And that, like you've said, sort of got you on your way to getting some support with housing and income and accessing different services like healthcare. And so that's been a great support to have, perhaps in addition to legal support. Um, is there, like, thinking about your experience of working with me as a lawyer and working with CAS, what do you think's a little bit special about working with a lawyer? How did that feel different?
Um, my favorite thing about work with you is what's different about our relationship than with CAS. With my CAS worker, it was always a mutual relationship where like uh I tell you where you can find this resource, and then it's kind of up to you to make sure you get the resource, do what you need to do. With Claire, it was always okay, I help you find the resource, help you look into it, follow up and see if it was helpful, and then we move on to the next thing. With a lawyer, it's someone that holds you accountable, but they basically hold you accountable by who they are, what they can help you with. Just knowing that I can't do this on my own, but if I reach out to Claire and Claire puts in her time, gets it done for me, it's motivating to make sure you get it done.
Yeah, yeah, I think we always showed up for each other in the relationship for sure. Um, I think, and we really talked about all the different goals that you wanted to work on. Um, we talked, and as you identified different goals, I think we talked about different options. We did some problem solving, and where I could, I tried to advocate for you with the different systems or services you had to navigate. I hope that that was helpful. What impact do you think it had knowing that we had a confidential relationship? How did that feel?
That was the most comforting thing. As I said, my first time meeting you, I didn't know what to share because it was my first time basically letting anyone in, letting anyone know what's going on in my real personal life. These are usually things that are personal, but also very important in life. So these conversations being confidential meant a lot because I could open up. You will effectively be able to help me based off what I can open up and say, and I could trust that. I don't have to worry about it, third-party communication without my knowledge or anything,
Right.
basically.
I think that's a big part of we're always checking in to see, is it okay if I talk to this person about that thing? Is it okay if I share that piece of information with that person? It's really an ongoing conversation, I think, and I hope that that sort of helps, like you say, to um, encourage you to feel comfortable and be able to share because we're only as good as the information we have, right? Um, okay, so I think we were able to work together following we were able to get you connected with CAS. We worked on some immigration pieces together, and you were able to get permanent residence in Canada. That was awesome. Um, we also worked on a housing case together, and this was quite a big case. It went through 3 levels of court, and it's created an important precedent. Um, and do you want to tell me a little bit about what that, um, how I was helpful in that process? Do you remember when we initially connected about that issue?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so during COVID, I was facing some housing issues based off the fact that I was living in a transitional home and it was new to the whole COVID thing, and I just had some trouble with my landlord. And my landlord actually decided that they were going to say, "Hey, you need to go quarantine somewhere for 2 weeks." And I had already paid my rent. I didn't feel like this was right. I called Claire and I asked for some legal advice. I was like, "Hey, this is going on. This is what my lawyer, um, sorry, hi, this is going on. This is what my landlord is threatening to do. Is this legal?" Just for some support and advice. And it did escalate into a full-blown eviction. And Claire was super helpful in this process because I had someone on my side to explain what happened for me at least, and someone to fight for me. Someone
Mm-hmm.
that understood that even though the landlord has his rights as a tenant, I have mine too. And that doesn't mean that I should be treated unfairly. And
Mm-hmm.
in a case like this, in a housing situation like that, if I had went to court by myself, regardless of the outcome of the case, I know that a lawyer makes a better stance in the case.
Yeah, I think it was a really important moment for you to be able to understand what your rights were in that circumstance. Um, Certainly in the immediate situation, I was able to help you understand what the landlord's rights were, the role of the police in that. I didn't think the housing program had acted properly in the way that it had dealt with this situation. So I took the case to the tribunal and then I appealed that decision through different levels of court. I saw what had happened to you as a systemic issue that impacted a lot of young people. And you told me, Lydian, that you really didn't want this kind of thing to happen to any other young person. And so that was a big reason why we um, took that appeal through the different levels of court was we wanted to try to change the law to protect young people from this sort of very sudden eviction in these circumstances. And so going through that court process, I hope was I think it was helpful and also challenging for you. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
It was very helpful just because, as I said, it was unfair. As you said, it happens to a lot of young people. And the most helpful part about it was in the moment, I really felt like I didn't know what was going on. And it was so helpful to call you and ask you, "Hey, in the situation, I know that there's laws about these things that I'm unsure of." And it was just really helpful to have you go by me with my rights. That
Mm-hmm.
kind of made me know what steps I needed to take in the next step
Mm-hmm.
based off me knowing what I could do, what I can't do. And that's My favorite question to call Claire and ask Claire, can I do this? Can I do that? Because her knowledge of the law is just amazing. And yeah, it's so helpful to know when you're in your right because it makes a whole difference. Even when you're
Yeah.
not, sometimes it's just clarity that you need.
So yeah, absolutely. You need some understanding of what your rights are in a particular circumstance. And I want to just move to the last issue we've worked on together has been an issue around harassment that you experienced from another tenant in your building. And now, what I want to say off the top is that I played a bit more of a background role on this legal issue because I think Lydian really was able to do some very impressive self-advocacy and she was able to raise this issue herself with her building and housing program with the police, able to approach them about this issue. And it was really, I really played a more supportive role in providing information and helping to navigate the court system. Which I think everyone appreciates help navigating that system. It's pretty intimidating at times. So you were amazing, Lydian. You worked so hard on this issue. Can you tell me a little bit about, that experience and your work with me on that?
That particular experience with Claire was a testimony of what I've learned from working with Claire. I started off by calling Claire, let her know the situation. We looked into what my options were. And from there, we went into applications, evidence, and applying for this case.
Mm-hmm.
Claire, she kind of stayed in the back, and I really appreciated that. She's on top when I ask her help. And if she sees that I kind of understand what I'm doing, or I don't ask for much help, she lets me do what I can. Really appreciated that. I went to the Court of Justice. I applied for the peace bond. When I got my hearing date, I let Claire know. And from there, she kind of took the wheel and she was very supportive. And once again, she helped me get through this. And I feel so much more safer now, just having to know that this is something that has been dealt with. Process is all over now. And as I said, I called her and I asked what my options were, and we chose what was fit for my situation. And throughout the whole process, Claire made sure that she advocated for me what my issues were, what could be helpful to fix these things, and what it has been like for me, which was most important because in certain situations, someone advocating these things for you are much more helpful than you doing it yourself.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that you've learned any particular skills or lessons having worked with a lawyer, and has it sort of impacted your decision around becoming a social worker?
It definitely has impacted my decision. Being a social worker came from this decision stemmed from working with you and joining into CAS. When I got emancipated based off my help with Claire, I ended up showing CAS that I do need some support, but I am trying my best to be independent. I went on a volunteer plan with them, and I actually have been with CAS for the last 5 years now. Now I am a year into my training program, and I just started George Brown for my schooling. And I can say that my main purpose or main reason for wanting to become a social worker is to give back that stability that working with you and CAS gave me. From when I just came here and I didn't have any idea of how to get into school, where I was going to live, what I was going to do for work, to being able to slowly navigate these things and officially say that I've been through the process. And I know that a lot of the work had to be done by me, but I also acknowledge that the help came from these resources or support that I had from before. And I honestly want to be able to do that for someone. I want to be able to do that for every kid that I can. I want to be able to make a difference in this world as much as I can because of the things that I've seen that I know that are out there.
Hmm. Awesome. It's wonderful to hear, Lydian. I'm so proud of you and
Thank
all
you.
the hard work you've done. Okay, I think we're at our time. So I'll hand over to Amanda, I believe, who's going to run our next portion of the session.
Amazing. Thank you both to Claire and Lydian for kicking us off and really contextualizing this whole conversation, making it more real for everybody. It kind of like dives into our first question and coming back to what Promise kicked us off as a reflection at the beginning of like when we think about legal services and legal supports and how they can work with young people and specifically addressing homelessness. I think oftentimes our minds go toward like criminal justice involvement, but like Lydian and her story, there's a lot of other issues that come up. And so maybe to sort of kick things off and to also introduce Kelly and Gabriella, I'll ask you to just share like what are some of the legal issues that you encounter that maybe like pop up in ways that may be unexpected in your work. Maybe to give Claire a moment to catch her breath, I'll start off with Kelly and then Gabriella and then Claire.
No problem, Amanda. Like Amanda said, I'm Kelly Russo. I'm with the American Bar Association's Commission on Homelessness and Poverty, through which we have our Homeless Youth Legal Network, which increases access to legal services for youth and young adults experiencing homelessness. So a lot of the work that we do really is the connecting the lawyers with the youth with the lawyers, and then lawyers with other lawyers to really ensure that we're providing the youth with the legal services that they need. In terms of legal issues, to answer your question, Amanda, I was really impressed by Lydian and Claire's conversation and just how many different topics they were able to take on together. I think it gave the participants on this call a good idea of the breadth of legal issues that a lawyer might be able to assist with. And something that I always remind folks when I'm talking to them is oftentimes lawyers can do more than just remove those legal barriers. They can really help stabilize a youth or a family to ensure that they have what they need to really thrive. So whether that's helping a youth or their family access benefits, whether that's ensuring that they have access to school, whether that's navigating the different systems and working through as a go-between. Oftentimes, a lawyer can really help a provider to just be able to focus on the youth themselves and take on some of those other tasks that are at hand. So working as a partner in partnership, as the wraparound team in the overarching goal of prevention, I think is a unique role that a lawyer can play that's not often thought of. Gabby, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, so I am Gabriella McDonald. I'm the Deputy Director at Texas Appleseed, located in Austin, Texas. Texas Appleseed works on a wide variety of issues, many of them kid-focused, and came to working on youth homelessness and youth homelessness prevention because we saw some of the overlap with our fair housing work and with our truancy work and education justice work. And so there were a number of things that we were seeing, and we were literally sitting in a courtroom because in Texas, youth who missed, I think it was something like 10 days in a 60-day period or something like that, or 6-month period, could end up in adult criminal court in Texas. And we realized that a lot of these youth were experiencing homelessness. That's why they were missing school. And so we started to think about this on a policy level and the ways that the state and the local school districts could better serve youth who are at risk of homelessness or experiencing homelessness. And I also serve as the special advisor, as one of the special advisors for the Commission of Homelessness and Poverty, and get to work with Kelly frequently, which is fantastic. But yeah, I think there are just a huge variety of ways that lawyers can really help support, especially on the policy side, side, because oftentimes there are legal aid lawyers who are seeing youth experience problems over and over and over again. And if we can change the law so that everybody's job is easier, so that Claire's job as she goes to, advocate for what Lydia needed, is significantly easier, it'd be great. And just some of the ways that we do that are thinking about making sure people have access to vital documents or what medical consent means. And oftentimes, sometimes it's a matter of not necessarily changing the law, but making sure the law is being followed. So, and just making sure that enforcement mechanisms are actually being followed and in place. And I think those are some additional ways, in addition to the actual substantive work that lawyers can do. I think there are other things that lawyers can make sure are getting done because they're in the place to say to the designated actors that this is against the law. Here's what the statute says, and this is what you're supposed to be doing, to make sure that things get done. Or if the law isn't great, thinking about going to the necessary levers to change them.
Thanks, Gabriella. Claire, do you want to jump in with anything else to add too?
I just wanted to support that idea of increasing our awareness and knowledge of what the law currently is. For example, in Lydian's story, she was eligible to register for school, but it was over 6 months that she was out of school because the school board didn't properly understand the law around her right to register. And it took one letter for them to register her. And, that's appalling that she missed out on that amount of school. And so it's just a good example of that, making sure that the systems that are working with young people understand what the law is, so that we don't have these issues cropping up, requiring the intervention of a lawyer. And so that's sort of one example. And I think in terms of like legal issues that can lead or contribute to a young person's experience of housing instability or homelessness, I think, as Kelly said, there is really such a wide range. When you hear a young person's story of housing precarity, there is so often a root cause that has some connection to a breach of their legal rights, whether that is, being victimized, being discriminated against, having like criminal charges, conditions that prevent them from being in the home where they were living. It could be an issue around their immigration status. And these issues are so difficult for young people to recognize as legal issues, and to be able to access good information and then good legal assistance. So I think there are often issues that get overlooked, but something that we can all help to increase our knowledge and awareness of them.
That's excellent, and actually a really good segue into thinking about specifically what legal services and like youth homelessness prevention, like what are some of those legal issues that come up that you keep an eye out for that may actually put young people at greater risk of experiencing homelessness or might be causing some of those barriers to exiting homelessness if that's their current experience. Maybe I'll start with Gabby this time.
Yeah, so, for us as a policy organization, the way that we see it most often is interaction with other systems. Oftentimes, interactions with other systems both lead to youth experiencing homelessness or prevent them from exiting effectively. And so that's the child welfare and the foster care system. That's our juvenile justice system. That's education justice and, zero tolerance policies. Or the fact that, one of the things that we noticed when we did a report called Young, Alone, and Homeless in the Lone Star State, which really looked at youth experiencing homelessness in Texas, was that schools were suspending and expelling youth experiencing homelessness. And if you're suspending somebody who doesn't have a place to go to or expelling them, where are they going during the day? And then that exposes them to more judicial and criminal involvement. which then creates more problems for somebody to get access to housing because they have a criminal record. And when you stack all of that together, that becomes a problem. And so I think one of the real big warning signs for us as a policy organization is if we can stop other systems from creating conditions that allow for youth experiencing homelessness. You know, one of the things that we see in our juvenile justice system is sometimes in Texas, the juvenile justice system will release a youth or won't release a youth because they don't have a place to send them. And so they'll release a youth to the street, release them directly into homelessness. And so one of the things that we strive to do is talk to our juvenile justice administrators about making sure that they are planning well before they ever plan to release a youth. About a housing plan, about a employment plan, about making sure they're enrolled back in their public school. All of those things are really essential to making sure that youth have the support they need if they're going to touch these systems at all.
That's awesome, Gabby. Kelly or Claire, do you want to jump in and add some more about some of the things you look for as well?
I think one of the things that, at least in the United States, that we see often that sometimes people don't think about is age matters. So minors experiencing homelessness have an even more difficult time accessing what they need. For example, the inability to contract that can prevent a youth from accessing housing. An unaccompanied minor trying to access medical care without parental consent is another huge issue that we're seeing. So these kind of go along the lines of both individual barriers, so the types of barriers that Claire's working on to overcome with an individual youth, but they also are systemic barriers. So they're also the types of policy issues that Gabby's working on in Texas. And with that, with changing the laws, with making it so that there's the ability for a youth that needs to access medical care, that sometimes involves rewriting laws or creating laws that don't already exist. So that's some of the work that we do at the Homeless Youth Legal Network. We work with communities to talk through areas of gaps that are missing by looking at what legal issues are we seeing happen over and over and over again. What are the areas that could use advocacy and attention and the redrafting or creation of new laws to ensure that the youth have what they need in order to really thrive.
That's awesome. Yeah, and like I think you're really pointing to that like dynamic work, both you and Gabby, of like it's the individual and very interpersonal work that we saw demonstrated through Claire and Lydian's discussion, and also this like really important advocacy, policy change, systems change ultimately piece that is addressing structural issues that are like really specifically affecting individual young people's lives. Claire, anything else you would want to add?
No, I think I agree with the comment that legal issues change over time depending on age. So a lot of the work of the lawyers in our office focuses on 16 and 17-year-olds. It's such a vulnerable age where young people are, in Ontario, able to leave home and live independently. Withdraw from parental control without a court order. They're able to make that decision and act upon it independently. A lot of legal issues, and regardless of the jurisdiction and your law around young people leaving home, there are a whole collection of legal issues that come up around that age. And Lydian's case is a really good example of just a few of them: accessing education, getting ID, getting income support. Do they need support from CAS? Looking at their immigration status and access to different services. All of those pieces have a legal element. They engage the young person's legal rights. And so where issues come up in that cluster of issues, a lawyer may be of assistance to help advocate for that young person to access. It's also an age in which the criminal justice system and the education system really intertwine, especially where incidents happen in the school context. And so that's another really common issue that comes up in our office. I think, and again, Lydian's case really demonstrates this, as young people get older, that they're 18, 19, 20 plus, the legal issues change a little bit. It's like perhaps less intertwined with access to education. They become ineligible, or the support available from the child protection services changes. And so the issues come up more around housing. And we saw in Lydian's case, it's not just disputes with landlords. It's what are your rights in a transitional housing program? Oh, you're having a dispute with a tenant in the building. What are your rights around that? Is there a criminal incident and conditions that impact upon your housing? So lots of different ways that legal issues can come up in housing. And certainly issues around employment as well, as young people are entering the workforce, trying to get jobs and become more independent in that way. So yeah, definitely legal issues changing over time depending on age.
Thanks, Claire. And so we've talked a bit about the various legal issues that come up when a young person is either imminently at risk of homelessness or is currently experiencing homelessness. I wonder what you folks have to say about, like, how can legal professionals and services support young people further upstream? So doing more of that preventative work, like what are possibly some of the ways that this has come up in your work? Maybe I'll start with Kelly first, and then Claire, then Gabriella.
I think going back to what I mentioned before in terms of developing policy and advocacy, some of the work that we do at the Homeless Youth Legal Network is working directly in local communities, bringing together not just lawyers, definitely not just lawyers, but also educators, individuals that are working with the court systems, anyone that really touches the life, service providers, shelter providers, and then most importantly, the youth themselves, hearing directly from youth about what are the legal issues, what are the barriers that you're experiencing, what needs to change. That's really been the most important and impactful part of our work in the advocacy arena. So bringing the youth to the table, giving them the mic and asking what can we do to support you? What could we do to make sure that you are a success? And then taking that information and actually doing something, changing the laws that need to be changed and advocating alongside those youth. I think that's the most important thing that we can do in the prevention space as advocates. Obviously, there's much more work to be done and roles for many different types of lawyers, but I think that one in particular is one that I've seen in my work and through the conversations I have with different local communities, and making those connections too. Sometimes just having a conversation in a room with people from different systems bringing them together to really talk through and work through issues is what needs to happen in order to make positive change. That those cross-system conversations, starting at the local level and then getting broader and broader to sometimes the state or a region, is something that we've done a lot of work in. And I'm happy to chat too afterwards about with anybody that's interested in these types of roundtables and convenings that we hold.
Thanks, Kelly. Claire.
I think I would, following on from Kelly's comments about centering the young person, I think, a big part of the workshops and the drop-ins in our program focuses on giving young people knowledge about their rights. And not just knowledge about what the law says and what their rights are, but tools so they can take that and develop that confidence to engage in advocacy, whether that's themselves, having conversations or reaching out to supportive adults in their life or supportive services. So I think that's a big part of our program is trying to develop that capacity and that confidence for young people, and having conversations around rights be sort of more normalized. So it's not, oh, I'm creating a problem. Oh, I'm, this is going to make things worse for me, or it doesn't matter what I have to say, but really trying to encourage uh, an understanding that of for young people of their rights and what they can steps they can take themselves.
Yeah, go ahead, Gabby.
Yeah. No, every child and family and young person is different. And our government systems are meant to be a kind of plug and play situation. And that doesn't always work. And so it's really important to remove red tape and barriers as much as you possibly can, with still making sure that our systems function as much as they are supposed to, right? And so that means things like making sure that access to ID and vital documents is easy so that people can get jobs and things like that. In Texas, one of the things that we have done is we were able to create a fund for youth who are experiencing homelessness or who are foster care or formerly foster care involved or child welfare involved. And that fund then goes to pay for their IDs. So that when they go to the DMV or whatever that looks like in any given state, but for me, it's Texas, that they can go, they can say, I'm using my school homeless liaison as an address. I'm using my local shelter as an address, and the fee is already paid for. And that fund has grown so much because people literally just donate to the fund when they renew their own driver's licenses, that we're now able to provide driver's ed classes for that same group of youth. And that then means that youth may be able to get a job they otherwise wouldn't have if they can take the class, because driver's ed have gotten really expensive. I didn't realize how expensive it had gotten since I took my driver's ed test. And that hopefully gives them access to a driving school that also gives them access to a car, because we realize that's an issue. We're also thinking about insurance as a barrier. All of those things are things that can really play a big difference in whether a youth can or can't get a job, and support themselves, and have people who they can reach out to and ask these questions about as they go through each step of, kind of what Claire and Lydian were talking about, right? And so just thinking about some of those things is super important. And the only way we would know that is talking to people who are working on the ground with this population and the youth themselves. And being able to create opportunities like that has been a real excitement, but it's also a real challenge because funding is always a huge issue when dealing with some of these things, and enforcement is always a huge issue. And so, to actually do prevention work, it really takes thinking about all of these issues pretty holistically. And so with the Commission on Homelessness and Poverty, we put together the Model State Statutes Guide, which really talks about all of the different ways that youth experience homelessness, what leads to youth experiencing homelessness. And for each statute and each issue, we start with the narrative. We provide kind of a short title of the statute, the purpose of the statute, definitions, because just defining what youth is, most of us who work in the space work under 25, but it goes back to that age thing. It's really important because if you have a program that can serve 16 to 18 or only 18 to 22, or, that's really going to affect where you're able to send youth and how you're able to support youth. And so the more of those like barriers you can remove as you're coming up with policy, the easier it is going to be for people like Claire to be flexible and make sure youth are able to be served in whatever programs are local to them. So.
Thanks, Gabby. And that's also a really good segue into the next conversation. And I'll probably start with you on this one, because thinking more broadly, like there's the immediate case-by-case ways that prevention can happen in a young person's life, but I want to pivot to thinking about those like broader long-term homelessness prevention efforts. And so what is needed in our legal systems and from policymakers to address the legal barriers to ensure that long-term housing stability is something that all young people can have? And so, yeah, I'll let you kick things off, Gabrielle.
So I mentioned the model state statutes work that we did with the Commission on Homelessness and Poverty. In addition to the things I already mentioned, the kind of substance of each of those statutes has to include three really important things. The actors, who's going to do what? The enforcement, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, what's going to happen instead? And the funding, you got to be able to pay for whatever support it is you need. And so, in thinking about some of the policy and system recommendations and change, it's really important to think about all of those things because honestly, we were looking at Texas and how to actually holistically care for youth that are in this situation. And we don't have any specific entity that looks at supporting these youth. And maybe that's what we need to create. Maybe we need an Office of Youth Homelessness in Texas to actually be able to support that and think about all of the unique ways and have a place for youth to go. In the meantime, we're working with, all of the shelters across the state. We're talking to McKinney-Vento liaisons. So Claire mentioned that Lydian mentioned that they were just trying to get her registered for school. Well, McKinney-Vento in the United States says that all youth need to get registered no matter what. And the number of registrars throughout the state that just won't do it is remarkable. And so it is a matter of just sending a letter or talking to that homeless liaison to say, hey, you need to get this kid registered. Or for example, our medical consent laws for youth are actually pretty good in Texas. Outside of abortion and immunizations, they're pretty good. You can consent to a lot, but you have to get hospitals and their legal departments to be okay with that. And so it's going to take maybe education across the board about what that means to that population. And so it's not just changing the law on the local school board, state, federal level. It's also about making sure all the actors that encounter this population know what the law is, as Claire mentioned before, and also that they are feel secure in what the law states, because that's the other thing is sometimes the law isn't always clear and people are going to be more cautious, especially with young people and people under the age of 18. And so creating opportunities where there's an ability for youth to consent to necessities. And one of the big things that I think we've seen recently is a lot of shelters are figuring out that youth are experiencing homelessness for things that we could prevent. And that sounds silly because this whole thing is about prevention, but it's like somebody needs help with an electric bill or somebody needs help with groceries. They just can't literally feed an additional mouth in their household. But if the shelter can provide $100 for groceries that month, that might leave that youth in the housing in which they're able to be safe. And so the problem is a lot of shelters are like, well, can I just give that $100 to that youth if we create a program? And it's not clear to them. And so lawyers can help provide that clarity. Maybe we need a statute, but maybe the politics in the state aren't such that a statute would be helpful. So maybe there's another creative way to do that. But it's helpful to have lawyers think about the different ways to be able to make those changes and to serve youth within the statutory framework in what you're working. So that's a really long roundabout way, but there's a lot of different ways that we are doing things. And I will just say the last thing I will say, as a policy organization, we do a lot of research, we do a lot of writing and reports and facts things. We then follow up with advocacy. We then follow up and see if that advocacy was effective in doing what it was supposed to do. And the last thing is self-help materials, youth knowing their rights, youth knowing when they need to raise some questions, youth knowing who to take those questions to. It's really important for youth to know what they can do so that they are also the ones bringing these issues to our attention and not just kind of hiding and suffering in silence, or, they're thriving in silence, but they could be thriving so much easier if we were just able to give them some help. So.
It's amazing, Gabby. That's really helpful. And yeah, really driving home the point that like the law is only as good as the people's knowledge of it, education being such an important element of all of this. And then also being able to work really hard, all the hard work that you're doing to make things easier for folks to get people the support they need in a timely way and to be flexible and meet young people where they're at. That's incredible. Claire, do you want to add any thoughts on this topic as well? And then we'll go to Kelly.
I think I would just encourage everyone, perhaps this is less on the policy side, more so, if you're in a space where you're not a lawyer, you don't necessarily have access to a lawyer on speed dial, what are some ways that you can action what we're talking about today? And I would say becoming aware of some accurate and reliable legal information resources. There are some great ones for Ontario, Steps to Justice. We have a website, JFCY's website. Those are great for Ontario, but the law is different wherever you live. Becoming familiar with that legal information so that when you have a conversation with a young person and they raise an issue and you think to yourself, oh, I think there's a legal issue in there, you're able to access some of that information, become familiar with some of the legal terms, the legal process, and then becoming more familiar with some of the free legal resources that might be available in your area, whether that's publicly funded legal resources or, a lot of like some of the organizations I work with have a few lawyers on speed dial for issues that they encounter frequently, immigration lawyers, criminal lawyers, lawyers that you know have the requisite training, a trauma-informed approach. They understand where clients are coming from, and you're able to speak with them and trust that they will provide good advice and support for a young person. So developing those networks of lawyers, I think, is a really helpful step to take. So knowing where to get legal information, knowing some legal resources available to you, and just having a mind when you're speaking with young people about rights infringements and legal issues that can come up. I think is important to include in your conversation with that young person, as Gabriella was saying, so that young people start to develop that capacity to recognize legal rights and some of that and develop some of that ability to self-advocate and that language around rights, I think, is really helpful. So those are the comments I would make.
Thanks, Claire. And Kelly.
Building off of kind of what Claire had mentioned in terms of resources, if you're located in the US, through our Homeless Youth Legal Network, we have a directory, a map on our website of what lawyers exist in each of the states that are able to serve youth experiencing homelessness, including minors. So we have that map, we have the list of programs and the types of cases that they take. So I encourage you to use that resource and share it with other providers in your area or other advocates that could use that. We also have a listserv. And if you're interested, just shoot me an email. I'll put my email in the chat. But the listserv is nationwide, has close to 500 people on the listserv. And basically, it's not going to spam your email, I promise, but it's an opportunity and a platform for lawyers to talk with one another, and also advocates, educators, providers to bounce ideas and best practices, share webinars like these, and then also locate lawyers when a lawyer is needed. So that's something that I can assist with if you reach out to me directly. The listserv can assist with that as well. And then we also have model programs that we've collected data from that we have on our website. These are programs that are legal programs that are providing legal services for unaccompanied youth. So all of those different types of resources, I encourage you to check those out. And we'll talk a little bit later, I think, too, about what we're hoping to do internationally, take HYLN to the international scale. But I'll leave you with that in terms of US-based resources.
Yeah, I might actually segue us right into that and share just this quick slide for people to see, which also links you right to those resources that Kelly was talking about, because we want to make sure that a resource like this is available more broadly than the United States. And so we're just encouraging folks, if you know of legal services or people in your network, legal professionals in Canada and globally, if you want to send them to this link, link. There's information about the Homeless Youth Legal Network, but there's also a link to a survey where the folks at the ABA are really wanting to map out all of these services so we can have a better resource to be able to share knowledge and increase our ability to get these kinds of resources into communities. So I'll leave that up for a moment. Maybe I'll ask folks, because it kind of brings us into our Q&A section, and I've seen some questions coming up from folks about where do we go for more information about whether it's like policy changes that we want to make, or like how to get involved in that work, or where do we go to like find out about. So if there's anything else other folks want to say about resources and where people could be looking.
Well, actually, can I just explain? I was one that asked the question.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
All right. So I was trying to sum it up, but my name is Dennis Anderson, and my experience kind of touches everything you guys have said. I am not a youth, but I was definitely affected throughout my whole life. And I'm currently in a situation where so what happens, like, if unfortunately, you end up in a situation like myself, and now you're seeking, to get help and to also to get policies intact. So just briefly, a couple of things that's been happening to me. So I have ADHD. It was really bad when I was younger, and my psychiatrist sent a letter to my school in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and they were supposed to give me a test. But what they did is they just suspended me to the point where in grade 11, I got into a fight off school property with a white guy, and they expelled me for that. So my mom appealed the expulsion, and I won, and I got to choose any school I wanted to go to. But they were literally pipelining me into the judicial system. So that's, of course, I got caught up into the judicial system at 17 years old. And I'm now have 20 years in and out of the system. And the jail system didn't know that I had mental health issues as an ADHD. And so I got into the mental health system about 4 years ago. And I really thought, I tried to go to college. I did many extracurricular activities. I was trying. Then I got involved with addiction and bad company and all of that. So February of this year, through all the things that's happened to me, I realized that my mental health issues were causing me most of my problems in my life. So, and I got to this realization with trying to navigate the mental health system. And I got housing. It's called Mental Health and Justice Housing through Access Point. And I've been housed ever since. But almost immediately when I got housed, I got harassed, discriminated against. Like my rights were violated. I did not know about my landlord and tenant board rights, and they really did try to take advantage of that. The issue, what happened is that I'm coming from a good home, and I'm coming from a lot of positive things. So their treatment of me was very off. I was like right away. I was like, I'm like I didn't know why they were so rude and disregard about would accuse me of things I didn't do, and then I got arrested 10 months after my first year, and they immediately filed for eviction. Didn't tell me, and I found out a month before my court date when I was in jail. And then I wrote an eight-page complaint detailing everything, how housing was affecting my case management and how I wanted to, seek workers. And to the point where I told them that I was going to go seek legal counsel. I was going to go to the media. I was going to go to human rights if they were going to continue this type of treatment. Not only did they continue that type of treatment, but they, in October of last year, they called the police and said I was evicted. And I got arrested for being in my own apartment. And that was after the power went out in my apartment, and I got out 30 days later, so my windows boarded up, no power in my unit. You understand?
Yeah. Dennis,
so
do you mind if I just jump in quickly here?
Go ahead.
I just want to say I'm really sorry to hear about those different struggles that you've had. And I can see so many different moments along the way where a lawyer would have been really helpful for you to speak with. I think this isn't a context in which we're able to, have a conversation about legal advice, but I can suggest, given that you're in Ontario, that Steps to Justice is a really great online legal resource. It has a lot of good legal information that might help you to sort of figure out some of the some of the terminology being used, some of the resources available, and it's formatted in a step-by-step like question answer format. So hopefully it leads you to the right resource to contact to help address the issue. It sounds like there's a collection of different things going on.
Claire, Claire, so yeah, thank you very much. I will definitely check that out. I'm basically like Lydian. I can do a lot of stuff on my own, right? And I have already. Now, one of my main things I want to do, and this is not like in terms of what I need to do legally, is I am going to get change. I want to get policies and things in place that makes it so that it's not easy for the services to do things like this. So how do I go about getting help with like I'm gonna become an advocate, a Black mental health advocate, and I also want to do a podcast and YouTube channel. So I'm really looking to network and navigate and get myself and my story out there. How do I do that?
Oh, that's amazing. That's fantastic. That's not my field of expertise, but I'm really encouraged to hear that. Does anybody else have ideas? Perhaps it's a question for the chat. Oh,
Apologies,
sorry.
everyone.
I think I ended up being muted.
Sorry, we were just dealing with some technical difficulties for a second there. Please go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to suggest for Mr. Anderson, perhaps it's a question for the chat, and others might have ideas of how you could get involved in some advocacy.
And Amanda, I wonder too, in Canada specifically, if making the shift has any opportunities for like advocates with lived experience to join in, or just advocates in general. I'm sadly not as familiar with like the individual projects, but I'm assuming that there's opportunities within making the shift.
Potentially, yeah. Like I think it's something that, well, this is just kind of the beginning of this conversation around legal and justice issues and their intersections with youth homelessness and prevention. So, I mean, we'd love to continue this conversation, absolutely, because it is something that needs more of a spotlight. And the services that are available, there's incredible services like what Justice for Children and Youth have to offer, but unfortunately aren't as widely as available as we'd love them to be. So it's I think, a really pressing need for advocacy. And Dennis, thank you for taking your situation, really wanting to advocate for change. I think that's really important. And so I think what we could do is, we've also, Kelly and I have put out this blog as well. And hopefully as we start to hear more about what other services are out there, we can do more to link people and do some more intentional advocacy in Canada and internationally to really spotlight these things, because they're not just individual issues, they are systemic. It's impacting many people, and especially knowing that it's starting at such a young age and can impact people over their life trajectory. Those are issues that are really important to get right at, and to wrap all of our minds around. Something that I've really taken away from the discussion today has been just the way that lawyers and legal professionals can be these like dynamic folks that can really link people together and work across systems in ways that maybe we don't recognize. So I'd love to keep this conversation going, because it is something that I think gets kind of put into the back of our minds, or doesn't necessarily come up as the first thing when we think about youth homelessness or homelessness in general, but is really something that is so pressing and underlying so much of everybody's experience. I'm just gonna take a look at my other questions here as well. Let me see here. So I think there was a question about, let me just find it. Okay, somebody wondering about if organizations like the ones around this table or other legal professionals have worked with or would be interested in working with public or academic libraries. Have any of you folks experienced that kind of work?
Yeah, so I think we would love to work with public libraries. I mean, one of the things that we recently did, and actually I think it was released yesterday, was just a homeless youth resource guide that really talks about where are all of the shelters throughout the state of Texas, where are all of the food service providers, people that provide clothing, medical resources, just it's super helpful not only to youth to also but also the people who serve them. And libraries can be really essential in help creating those maps and making them usable for people because sometimes, the resource exists, but it's hard to find or it's all over the place. And consolidating all of the collective knowledge of the people who work in the space can be really important because they're not always talking to each other because they're always putting out fires constantly, right? So having somebody like the library system to be able to do that is great. I will also say that when we put together our youth homelessness resource, and I posted it here in the chat, the one that says U.S. Youth Homelessness Resource, there is actually a printed version. And of course, it almost goes out of date immediately upon being printed. So they're not always being printed anymore. But when they were, I literally just dropped them across libraries in the United States to be put out and used. And I think libraries and library systems are really super helpful because even if nothing else, youth have a phone, and that's where they're getting a lot of their information and searching the internet. And sometimes the library is the best place to get your internet connection, right? And so if you're already there and somebody has some connections that you didn't necessarily realize, that's super helpful.
I agree. I actually have presented in the past to the Young Adults Library Association in the US, and helped educate library personnel on what types of legal issues exist and kind of how to interact with youth and provide them and connect them with resources in their communities. So I think there's a ton of value in really engaging with the librarians that are on the ground, that are interacting with the youth day to day. And making sure that they feel equipped themselves with the knowledge and resources that are available in the community. So absolutely 100%. Those are the types of people to really work with and engage in your own communities.
Claire, anything you want to jump in on that one?
Only to say that libraries are amazing. They just offer so much. And I think yeah, like Gabriella mentioned, phones, internet access. I know young people often have, after school clubs. I've presented at after school clubs there. It's a great way to connect with young people, mental health support. So 100% being that hub, knowing your community and knowing what services are available locally is such great knowledge. It's, like we can create these sort of resource guides, but they can be hard to access and they can go out of date so quickly. So just having that knowledge is such a great resource. Yeah.
I'm always so impressed at the variety of services and the ways that librarians just show up in their community and are constantly looking for more ways that they can serve their community in unique ways that really meet really important needs and fill important gaps that I shouldn't say not just getting people connected with books, because getting connected with books is an important thing, but they do so much. So thank you for that question, and hopefully there will be more conversation happening in the chat about that. We have time for maybe just one more question, and then maybe something that I'll just touch on as well. Maybe I'll start with touching on this question of, would having something like duty to assist, like in Wales, make this all a lot easier? I think that was in reference to a number of the different systemic issues that come up and legal barriers. Maybe our panelists aren't all familiar with the duty to assist model, but just from the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness perspective, something I can say is absolutely. I think actually, as we're thinking through duty to assist and having a duty to assist people who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness, having legal professionals involved in that conversation and designing it is going to be essential, and making sure that people also are educated on what they will have to do in that kind of scenario, can take the right actions, so that information is available to the people who need it. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Maybe as the one last question, and I think Claire, this is going to come back to you, because somebody's asking if we have some examples of policy changes that have been pushed for in Ontario, and what seems to be the barrier to changes. Maybe a big question, but maybe I'll turn it into something that other folks could answer as well, of just maybe there's a policy change you're really excited about that you're pushing forward right now, or something along those lines.
We recently had a success in a case in Ontario related to a piece of legislation called the Safe Streets Act. It was a piece of legislation where tickets were issued for things like squeegeeing or asking for money on the sidewalk. And a lot of the provisions within that act were struck down as unconstitutional, as breaching people's rights to life, liberty, and to security of the person. And so that was a great success that we're very pleased about. I mean, one not successful case would be the case we talked about today around transitional housing and their ability to evict quite quickly without warning and without offering support to find alternative housing. So that's an issue that we're trying to push forward in a policy space. I think that it's difficult to get everyone around the table and knowledge out there amongst transitional housing providers about this issue, but we're making efforts to do that. So if you run a transitional housing program, I would love to hear from you, and we can talk about that issue some more.
And I did see somebody in the chat mention that case in particular as being something they're looking at in school, and we're appreciative of you and Lydian sharing about. So it's encouraging to hear people are paying attention and getting connected to that work that you're doing.
That's great.
Yeah, any final closing thoughts from you, Gabby or Kelly?
I mean, just in regards to things we're looking forward to, you know, Texas's legislative session is every other year for about 6 months. So last legislative session, we were able to get a pilot program passed that basically ensured that foster youth got access to a checking and a savings account and really got taught how to use it before they leave foster care, which should hopefully be a preventative measure for future homelessness experience, but also just thinking about some of the ways that youth are operating in our systems. And so we're really excited about thinking about some of the new things we can push that are similar to our driver's ed bill, and making sure that our McKinney-Vento liaisons have all of the extra support that they need, and continuing on there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gabriella. And Kelly, anything you want to end off on?
I think a lot of the work that we've been doing within the individual states has been inspiring. I know in Delaware, we're working with a group of young people as part of their youth action board on whether or not Delaware right now doesn't have a emancipation statute. So there's not really any way for a youth to emancipate. So we've been working with the youth hand in hand to talk through whether one is needed or whether there's just tweaks that we can be doing to the current statutory language to make sure that the youth have access to medical services or access to education or employment or housing. So I think that there's promising conversations happening there, and that's something that we've done in a few other communities, but having those conversations and seeing what policy tweaks can be made to ensure that youth have what they need.
Amazing. Thanks, Kelly. And I'll just give one final shout out to Lydian for also contributing to the panel discussion, because we're coming down the last couple of minutes. I know you're still on the line, but if you want to jump in and say anything else, you're welcome to take the floor for a minute, but I also no pressure, just wanted to give some final appreciation for really kicking off this really wonderful discussion. And I think, yeah, I'll pause if you do want to say something, but no pressure. And then if not, we can turn it back over to Promise.
That was a really powerful conversation, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing today. It is really important to be reminded that, and to be mindful of the fact that there are always people who join us who are in need of imminent support. Naturally, we do this work for a reason, and it can be hard to come up with immediate responses to these things on the spot, because as we've discussed, so many of the issues that lead to the crises that we're experiencing and that are being outlined in these conversations are complicated and caused by multiple different things. And so I just thank everybody in the chat for being supportive and for sharing the resources that you're aware of and helping us to move this conversation forward. If you are curious about any of the wonderful panelists who've joined us today, please feel free to reach out through the email that I have put up on the screen, and we'll be able to get you connected accordingly with next steps if you have any follow-up questions. Once again, everybody, please join me in saying a huge thank you to everybody who joined us and shared their perspectives today. Thank you especially to Lydian for joining as a lived expert to share her perspective, because it's truly not an easy thing to do in a setting such as these, and we super appreciate it. In terms of exciting next steps that people might be looking forward to, I just wanted to briefly plug that part of the challenge with accessing services in the sector that we're aware of is that there's an issue around under-resourcing that we all know, but there is also the issue of like a lot of us are doing this work, but have a hard time getting it to the people who need it and get it connected with people. Sometimes the issue is just that lack of awareness. And one of the things that's been going on to try and address that is that there is a current survey going on that's global to try and connect people around the world who've been doing work that addresses this gap around how legal professionals can work to sort of advocate for youth who are at risk and help them through that journey. And so if you are curious at all about getting involved in that project, I'm going to put a link in the chat. If you're watching this back on YouTube, that link will be somewhere in the description box or on the webpage. So please feel free to take a look, send it to anybody you know who might be interested or have some sort of investment in this type of work, just so that they can share their perspectives and we can continue to bridge the gap between people who are doing this work all around the world. One more thing to put on your radar before we head out today is that next month's conversation is one that I'm really, really excited to share with you all about more in the coming weeks. But for now, I wanted to tell you that it's going to be focused on rebuilding home with Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people. We have some incredible speakers lined up who have some really powerful things to share about what it looks like to reclaim home, not just as a physical structure, but as a piece of cultural identity. And so please keep an eye on your emails, and we'll have more information for you about that in the coming weeks. Otherwise, that is all for today. Thanks again for everyone who joined and everybody who shared. It's always super special to see people show up for each other in the chat in this way. I wish you all a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're calling in from. And whether I see you next month or a couple months down the line, I just look forward to seeing you at one of these again, hopefully really, really soon. Bye-bye, everyone. I am now having trouble with finding the setting to end the meetings. Bear with me. Sorry, everyone. Zoom settings can be unpredictable on the day. Okay, here we go. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much for joining.